Hello and welcome to another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast. I'm your host, Erin Jane, and today I am joined by Egan de los Cobos. Egan is a firefighter and paramedic from Central California with 25 years experience. He's a certified health coach, and he's also the founder of First Wellness Health. After surviving a near-death motor vehicle accident in 2013, Egan was diagnosed with PTSD, which ultimately triggered an autoimmune condition that affected his everyday life. Beginning his own search for relief, he discovered how strongly our mind and body connection is and has become an advocate for aligning gut and immune health as well as physical and mental health after finding his own healing path successfully. So, Egan, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, wonderful. And Egan has been an absolute superstar today and got held back at work and has even still managed to come and jump on with me. So very, very appreciative. What drew you to want to join the fire department,
Egan? That's a great question. It was one of those things that I was never the kid who thought anything about public safety per se. My dad was a reserve police officer for a short time when I was a young child. And that was kind of the only exposure. And I had like uncles in the fire service. I knew it was out there. I just never really thought anything. So anyways, I went through high school and then I got my first semester of college and I'm like, I want to make a bunch of money. I'm going to go into business is what I think I'm going to do. First semester of college, I was in Santa Barbara, and the city college that was there is right next to the beach, which wasn't good for me because I'm a surfer. And I just kept looking out at there and the ocean. And after going through like my, beginning years of school, I just knew that I couldn't be inside any longer. And I'm like, okay, I can't keep going to school. I don't think college is totally my thing. I don't think money's worth it chasing. I'm like, what else can I do? I need something that's kind of active. I can be outdoors. Maybe a good schedule might be nice, and something that can take care of my family because I know I want to have kids one day. And so so my uncle worked for LA City Fire Department, and I'm like, well, I remember coming home from college and class one day, and I'm like, Mom, what can I do? And she's like, well, your uncle's a fireman. Maybe that's something that would interest you. I'm like, okay. So I called him up, and I'm like, hey, what is this firefighter thing? And do you like it? He's like, best job in the world. You never work a day in your life kind of thing.
Yeah.
He had been doing it for over 20 years at the time.
Wow.
And
okay.
I'm like, okay, well, what do I need to do? And so he said that you got to take an EMT class. And so I'm like, okay. So I remember sign up for an EMT class, a local community college in the other part of the county. And totally fell in love with it. I was like, oh man, this is really interesting. Like it's really something that I could maybe make a difference in. And I was never the best student ever growing up. I was BC student maybe. And my EMT class, I got like a 97%. I'm like, oh my gosh, like best grade ever. Whether it's easy or not, I don't know, but I applied myself and I liked it. So I'm like, well, there's got to be something to this. So I pursued that and then knew I wanted to do the fire service and the fire academy. And then right after I got my EMT cert, the local department, fire department was actually a paid call fire department here where I live. And I knew that. So I got hired on at 18 years old as a paid call firefighter, as an EMT, and started running calls right away, like about 6 months out of high school. And so I was introduced really quickly into that. And then went to paramedic school, became a paramedic within 2 years, worked private ambulance. And I kind of did that. And then currently with my current agency, I've been with now for 17 years. So that's kind of how I stumbled into the fire service. And I'm super glad that I did because I don't know what else I would do. And I truly enjoy it in my path. And even though like today, obviously crazy, but like that's part of it too, is like I had no idea what to expect this morning when I woke up, and my whole day is way different than I anticipated at 6 a.m. So, but that's part of the job, and that's part of why we like it too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, something that you said really resonated, that I'm like married to a firefighter who's been on the job for 20 something years. And I think a lot of you deeply know within yourselves that you're like, I cannot sit in an office surrounded by my four walls. And there's just something about it that like, you would rather shove a fork in your eye than like have that kind of existence. So I think it must be something that
Exactly.
really like permeates through the fire department and stuff like that. And so so you said that you've been so basically 25 years all up and 17 years with this current fire department, and that you're out in California. So what is that like each year? Because in terms of like the fire seasons and stuff that they have out that way, like it rivals things that I remember seeing growing up. Like when I was in Australia, we would have horrendous bushfire seasons, and just wondering whether you sort of face that kind of thing too.
Absolutely. So in our agency, that's a big part of our department. We actually take part responsibility for the state fire protection as well. So we're contracted to do that. So that's a big part of what we do. So especially this time of year, we go to anywhere in the state, and we currently had a strike team that just got sent out, 5 hours away, and it could be anywhere in the state at any given time. So that's part of our job is that we're part of that responsibility for wildland firefighting. And so any day we go to work, especially during the summer, we can expect to be gone for 14 to 21 days, typically about 14 days, potentially at any point in time. So that is part of there. And ironically, we had a lot of rains in the last few years. And the wildland fire season was kind of slower from my knowledge, from my years of experience. And then it's like we hit the ground running this year, and it's just like it used to be from what I remember. So it's very busy this time of year. And then we've had compounded, just like everywhere in EMS and fire, staffing shortages, and that's affected us as well. So you combine that with busy fire season, staffing shortages, that leads to other things. So there's compounding stressors, obviously, that we face all the time.
Yeah, massively. And like I was going to say, like how big is your department? Because if you guys are not only trying to staff your immediate area, but then also getting those strike forces like sent out, like how big is your department?
For our department overall, it's at 16 fire stations, and we have around 230 sworn firefighters.
Okay.
And so for our county, we're the biggest in our in our county. But on the grand scheme, compared to like Los Angeles County or the bigger agencies, we're kind of small. We're considered like a medium-sized department. But it's been compounded with the staffing problems we've seen over the last few years, and it's just trying to make up that lost ground. And we're not alone. All the other agencies, even private paramedics and stuff like that, they're getting hit hard too. It's just one of those things. Nursing, it's just one of those things that we're experiencing currently, and trying to get a grasp on it in hiring, but it's just been a constant grind, more so than most years in the past.
No, very much so. And I guess I don't know if I think it used to be, even just like being a cop, being a firefighter, all that kind of thing. It used to be a profession that I think a lot of kids sort of grew up wanting to do. And I don't know if that is the case anymore in terms of like recruiting numbers and stuff.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a lot. There's culturally, there's a different things, generational. Which I appreciate come from the mental health aspect, is that they get the work-life balance better than most of us who've done it for a long period of time. But that doesn't help with staffing problems. And so there's part of that. And then sadly, financially, the job's changed in the last few years because of inflation. And then changes to pension systems, especially here in California since 2013. There's been massive pensions changes. And so the job itself is not paying what it used to be financially. And then different generations are priding more not being being at work as much as most. And so sometimes they look at that like, I don't know if I want to be gone from my family for 14 days. So I want to go do something else. And then I can't speak to it personally, but law enforcement, just from what we know that they've experienced over the last 3 or 4 years, politically and everything else, and financially, they've been hit too. That job is changing drastically, sadly, in lots of ways too. So I know they're in even a worse spot than us in the fire service.
Yeah, massively. And that's everywhere. Like, I was a police officer in Australia, and I still speak to my friends back there all the time. And it's it's the same kind of thing. Like, no one wants to do that job anymore, unfortunately, because it's a great job and a great profession. And when it's done right, I guess, is probably the best way to say it. And so do you guys run, so like I know like my husband's department, they run like engine trucks and ladder trucks, and typically like like a paramedic EMT will be on like more of like an engine truck. Is that how your department is structured too? Like what's the setup of that for you?
Yeah, real close. We're considered an all-risk agency, so we do everything from structure firefighting, wildland firefighting, EMS, extrication, and all that. So we do mostly every station has a paramedic engine company out of it. And then we do have 2 ladder trucks as well. And then we're also heavily involved in the wildland. So we have a construction section with bulldozers. We have an air ops section. So we have helicopters, rescue ships, and then we have UTVs, watercraft, all that kind of stuff too. So we kind of do the whole gamut when it comes to emergency response.
Yeah, it sounds that way. My goodness. And so obviously, for anyone who follows Egan on social media, he is very open and vocal about the fact that you're involved in quite a serious car accident back in 2013. And obviously you were on the job at the time that happened. And from what I'm aware, you were also with your young son at the time, which I can't even begin to imagine how frightening that must have been. From whatever you're comfortable sharing, what can you tell me about that?
Okay. Yeah. So it was in 2013. There was there's a grocery store that has a coffee shop in front of it. And my son and I, he was 3 years old at the time, we'd always go there and hang out. And ironically enough, I was on a vacation day. I was supposed to be at work that day, but I took a vacation day because I had a trip coming up the following day, but I wanted to take it off because I wanted to see my son that day. And so typical day, went to the coffee shop, and we sit outside in this patio, and in front of this patio is a little gazebo. So we were enclosed in this gazebo, having my coffee. He had his croissant, which we did every day. And the way this grocery store is set up is there's a highway that runs kind of parallel to it, and then you come in off of this highway into the parking lot. And when you come into the parking lot, it's kind of a horseshoe, and when you first come in, it faces that grocery store where we're sitting in the patio. And then on this day, we're enclosed in the gazebo, and there was a driver coming in off of the highway, and elderly driver that was coming into the parking lot, and they were going way too fast. And so I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. And they're coming in. I hear tires screeching, engine revving, and then the biggest crash explosion I've ever heard in my life.
Oh, my goodness.
And so when I got thrown back and then and knocked down, and when I came to, I couldn't find my son. And I saw the car sitting there, wrapped my head around what just fuck happened. And just scared, panicked parent. That's it. And so there was another bystander who was on the other end of the patio who came over and started helping me try to find him. And so we're moving tables, chairs, debris. And then I finally find him, and he's lying face down, not moving, partially under the car. So in that moment, I'm thinking, this is it. This is every parent's worst nightmare. I'm about to pick up my dead kid. So I went, picked him up, and he starts crying right away. Best cry I've ever heard in my entire life. And so I squeezed him, and then I'm like, well, we as first responders, we like crying kids.
Yes.
It means they're breathing, and at least we can go somewhere from that. So we don't like them not. So that he's crying, I'm holding him, and I have two distinct feelings in that moment. One, the elderly driver pops the door and starts opening the door, and I'm holding my son, and I have two feelings of, this asshole almost killed me and my son, and I want to punch him in the face. But my legs might be broken and I'm in a lot of pain, and my son just got hit. So let's not punch them in the face, and let's go away from this car. So I went and sat down, and I held my son crying the whole time. And it was the weirdest feeling. So I'm sitting there in this parking lot, shit everywhere, and I know what happened, but it feels like a movie. Like the whole world is passing me by. And it was odd because I've seen those people in car accidents. Like you're trying to talk to them, and there's lights on, but nobody's home, kind of thing. And that was me. People came running up to me, and I physically couldn't get words out. It was the weirdest feeling. And anyway, so police, fire show up, obviously guys I work with. And then the captain who was on duty on the engine that day was actually a friend of mine, and he's actually works at my normal station, which I worked at, but he's working overtime that day. So he comes up to me, and he thinks that I am helping with the accident. So he comes up to me, and then I just had this conversation actually with him not too long ago, and he said, at first I thought you were involved until I looked at your face, and you were ghost white, which isn't like you, and just staring. And instantly he knew I was involved, and he's like, okay, I'll get like, and then he tells his guy, grab his son, grab him, get him in the ambulance. And so they did. So they got me over to the gurney. I went and sat down. I remember the EMT on the ambulance was like, oh, I want to put your son in a pediatric spine board. I'm like, the fuck you're not. I am holding him, and you're not getting him out of my arms. And so I held my son the whole time. I'm like, I'll take responsibility. I'm like, you're not taking him at all. And so I held him, and we went all the way down to the trauma center, and pure miracle. So I was literally just bumps and bruises. Same with him. They did a CT scan. They checked them all out, and only very minor physical injuries. So my legs were not broken, but they had bruises all over them. Same with my son. And we were discharged from the hospital within about 4 hours. There's nothing but a miracle that we're alive. There's no reason. I try to think like, oh, maybe it glanced us. No, it literally drove right through us, and miracle, chalk it up to, we shouldn't be alive. So obviously very thankful for that. So I was back in that parking lot to pick up my car later that day, went home. And then even that trip that I was supposed to go on, I still went on. I'm like, I lived. I'm like, I'm good. My son's fine. So I tried to win about my life. I've always been a grateful, positive person. And I just chalked it up to a miracle. And that's all it was. And so life just kind of went on. And up until this day, I've never had any physical health problems. I never really had any mental health problems at all. And that all changed. So within about 3 or 4 weeks, I noticed that my feet, my toes, my middle toes on both of my feet were swollen, and they were literally the size of my big toes. I'm like, oh, wow, that's flipping weird. I wonder if they were broken in the accident and I didn't know it. And so I went to the doctor, they did x-rays, and they said, no, but you're not broken. And they're like inflamed for whatever reason. So no answer. I'm like, well, that's really weird. And then I started getting plantar fasciitis over the coming months. And anybody who has that, it's like literally walking on steak knives all the time. It's just excruciating pain. So that went on for the first year. And then that led into my hip pain was so bad I couldn't even hold my son some days. My hip would literally give out. Like I couldn't go into work some days. Jesus. I would literally be walking, and then I just practically fall over because the hip pain was so bad. It was just like somebody hit you with like a lightning bolt in the side. And so all these physical symptoms are happening for years after the accident. So now I'm seeing specialists. I'm seeing podiatrist, chiropractor, and then my general doctor, and no answers. They're just saying it's osteoarthritis. You're just getting old at 30. When was that? So at 33 years old. So they're starting to say, I'm like, well, that's kind of weird, because that's kind of young, I think. So, so no answers. And so that's going on, physical symptoms. And then about a year or so later, after the first symptoms started, I started getting skin issues too. Psoriasis started happening. And so I started developing all these things, skin issues and arthritis issues, and ultimately was a psoriatic arthritis. But that wasn't diagnosed for years. So I went on with all these pains and symptoms and misdiagnosis for literally 3 or 4 years with zero answers. And every doctor I'd go to, I would say, hey, on just October 3rd, 2013, I was in this accident and now my health sucks. Is it related? Nope. All of them said no. I'm like, I just don't feel right about that. And I think it is, but it made me feel like I was going crazy.
I bet.
So I'm having all these physical health symptoms, and then I'm noticing that I'm having like anger issues. And for me, I'm a very mellow person. I'm not very angry, but I started having anger issues. I get really upset over real menial things. Things didn't go right, or I got my order wrong at a restaurant. And I noticed that just like this visceral anger of wanting to punch a wall or punch somebody in the face, like that's how gnarly it felt like almost like you were going to fight for your life for no good reason. It was the weirdest feeling to have that. And then obviously trouble sleeping at night. I didn't really have nightmares, but I didn't sleep good. But I thought that was kind of normal. I had a young kid, a job that was sleep schedule was all jacked up, and I'd just lie in bed even at home for 4 or 5 hours, and then eventually fall asleep for maybe 4 or 5 hours a night. And I thought that was normal. I just thought that was the way it was, or the cycle of life. So I didn't really think much of it. I knew I was tired all the time, but it just kept going, kept going. That's what I've done for the last 15 years. And so all these things compounded. Physical health was compounded. I even went down to UCLA for a specialist for my hip. It was so bad. And their solution to me was surgery. So what they wanted to do was cut me open at the hip, put my femur in traction, pull it apart, grind down my femur head, and then put it back together, and then tell me that I needed a hip replacement in 3 to 5 years. So that was the solution I was getting from the doctors. I would say, hey, I feel like there's something going on, and it would just, I didn't get anywhere. So they would give me prescription drugs that they wanted to give me. I didn't end up doing that. I just didn't feel right about it. I didn't feel like that was the answer for me. Drugs to me can be a very good thing, but it wasn't the answer for me that I felt like I needed at the time. And then I did use steroid creams for my scalp, and it was good. They would clear it up, but then it would come right back. So I'm like, well, that's weird. It's not a skin issue. There's something going on in my body, and I just don't know what the hell it is. And so then everything kind of reached a breaking point about 4 years into this. Oh, back up real quick. So when it comes to mental health and therapy, so about a few months, it was within a couple months after the accident. I knew it was a significant accident. There's no, I never didn't say that or think that was the case. But I was worried about my son. So I thought the trauma of what he went through and everything, I was concerned about him. So I made an appointment for a therapist a couple months after the accident, and I just went through my insurance, and so he evaluated my son and said, hey, like, he's 3 years old. Kids can be naturally pretty resilient, and he seems like he's okay. He's like, but I'm worried about you. And I'm like, I'm fine as long as my kid's good. Like, I'm kosher. Like, and so he said, I understand that. He's all, but I want you to do an exercise for me. And he said this in a backhanded way, kind of when I'm going out the door. He didn't really explain it. And so what he wanted me to do, he said, I want you to write I want you to write a letter to your son as if he had died. And I'm like, Jesus. I just got thrown back. And I'm like, what the hell? What is this? And so he didn't explain anything to me and just said this, and he wanted to see me. And I went, and I'm driving home, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, no, I'm not going to go stew on the fact that he's dead when he's alive right here. I said, that's stupid. I said, therapy's a joke. Screw that guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So I never went back to him. And that was my experience with therapy for first. And so, but all this stuff happened, physical health, mental health started declining rapidly. I felt like I literally felt like I was probably an 80-year-old man trapped in a 33-year-old's body. That's how my body felt. It was horrible. I didn't know if I was going to be able to take care of my kid. I didn't know if I was going to be able to work anymore. I didn't know any of that stuff. I thought that was it. This is my destination, my destiny, and I'm going to be broke and couldn't do anything anymore. So that's where my headspace was at.
Yeah.
And then everything kind of hit a breaking point one day. So it was the weirdest thing. So my son, he was now about five years old at the time. And I was in an apartment with my now fiance that I had, that we're married now, but anyways, she fiance at the time. And my son was sitting on a bar stool, so a little higher than most. And he was like 5 years old at the time. And while he's sitting there, we're making dinner, and he fell off the stool. And little boys fall, little girls fall, and it's not a big deal, right? When he fell, I felt like he was dying in front of me. It was the weirdest thing. Like that's what I envisioned that was it. Yeah. He was dying right there. So I picked him up. I started crying horrendously. And my fiance is like, what is wrong with you? And I said, I have no idea, but I can't live like this. I knew my reaction was way over the top, but I couldn't control it. So, and it was the weirdest thing. So I'm like, well, I can't live like this. Maybe therapy is something that I do need. And so I went and tried to find a therapist. And when I say that, did I go through my insurance? Nope. Did I tell my captain about this? Nope. Did I tell anyone at work that I was struggling? Nope. I didn't tell a damn soul. And so I found a therapist. I paid cash. I burned the receipt. And I didn't want anyone to know. And so I found this therapist, and within maybe 30 minutes of talking to her, she said, you have PTSD. And I'm like, PTSD? I said, I've heard of that. Isn't that like what military veterans get, like from seeing war and their buddies blowing up and really bad stuff? Like, isn't that what that's for? And she said, yes. And so, but you, from what you went through, you're a first responder, so you see bad shit, they can happen to you too. And I'm like, oh my gosh, really? And so it was the weirdest thing. So I walked out of that office today, and for the first time in like nearly 4 years, I had an answer to kind of what I felt in my body, and at least a direction. And so I underwent which is EMDR, so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Yep.
And it was the most amazing thing that I've ever had. It's pretty much voodoo, in my opinion, and but it works. And how I conceptualize it is like PTSD is like having it's like carrying around a big heavy box. It's a big heavy box. It's constantly in your way, and you can't let it go. And it's just in your way, and it affects every aspect of your life. What EMDR did for me was be able to open up that box, sort all the shit that's in there, kind of fold it back up and put it up on the shelf. It didn't get rid of that box of crap, right? But at least in a place that's not overwhelming to me. And if I need to access that, I can, but it's not overwhelming to me. So that's kind of what EMDR did for me. And so after being able to process that stuff and reduce that stress is when I started feeling like I could kind of let stuff go, and my body began to feel better. And concurrently, just like I've always been into health, like that was a big aspect of my life. I started diving into what could be going on in my body. And that's when I got into finding out what gut health was and our immune health. And then lo and behold, there is a mind-body connection to it all. And your mental health does affect physical health, and it's all encompassing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've been saying forever. And I felt like I was crazy, and everyone around me felt like I was nuts too, until I discovered this. I'm like, no, like there's science, like there's studies, there's scientific data it's not just a theory. Like we know that this is a thing.
Yeah.
And it's finally being talked a little bit more.
Yeah.
And doctors are kind of wrapping their heads around it a little bit more, but not a lot. So, but it's amazing when you go through it, and you know full well that it's a real thing. So I dove into everything. I like just gut health, supplementation, nutrition, you name it. And on that mind body connection was kind of my big thing. And so I started healing. So with like focused healing, it took me, I'd say within 3 to 6 months, I noticed some changes. Like my joints started feeling better. I was in, obviously at one point I could barely walk, let alone run. Now I can run every day. I run half marathons regularly. And I'm 11 years into my healing journey, and I still haven't had a hip replacement, and I don't have hip pain. So, and that's because that was what the solution was for me over 10 years ago. And I feel better now at 43 than I did at 33. And so I started doing this, and then I started sharing more about the stuff, about what I was going through with other firefighters and other people and online. And lo and behold, like people were reaching out to me saying, oh, I have this. I'm like, holy crap, you did? Like, you never told me any of that stuff before. So I just started kind of sharing things and helping people what I can. And I really started to enjoy it. And I'm like, well, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's more I can do. So that's when I kind of got certified for health coaching and decided I want to do this and help people and benefit others, because I learned so much. And I wish there was somebody like myself with that journey that they could help streamline to get me to healing, because I would have loved to not suffer for 4 to 5 years, and be able to like change my health, in 3 to 6 months would have been amazing at the time. And so that's what I've kind of been my journey. And then that's coincided obviously with my agency being a peer support team and a peer support team lead. And then I stress first aid instructor. So I've been doing a lot of that. So a big thing for me is wanting to be more proactive in trainings and stuff, and sharing, part of that sharing my story, obviously. But just educating people and first responders, and just sharing what I've learned so far about that mind body connection and stress, and how we can manage it so it doesn't get into a bigger issue. So that's the biggest things that I've learned so far.
That was a lot. So, thank you for sharing all of it. Like, it's quite the journey and quite the experience that, you found yourself on. And I think as well, any parent listening has obviously not experienced what you and your son went through, but like when you're saying that you came to and you didn't know where he was, like, and that sick feeling, that like physiological, like sick, I want to die feeling, that like I don't know where my child is. I think some of us have experienced for 3 seconds at the park when you've like lost sight of them, and you had it in one of the most horrendous like circumstances. So firstly, I'm so glad that you were both okay, and I presume that sort of everyone else that was in that gazebo at the time was okay, and that the driver was okay.
Yeah, we were the only ones in the gazebo because it was early in the morning, and the drivers were fine. The driver and passenger were fine. Yeah.
Oh, good. And yeah, like I think just so crazy, like that whole journey that you ended up going on, and how, like I can't even begin to imagine just how fraught and frustrating and demoralizing, just continually getting bounced from like a surgeon to this person to that person, and like them giving you all these sort of piecemeal answers for what was going on, but never truly discovering what the actual answer was, but also it really kind of sounded like no one was ever actually truly listening to you, and you're like, something feels wrong in my body. Like, I know this is symptomatic right now, but something else is going on. And it really kind of sounded like that was never truly like acknowledged from a lot of the people that you ended up seeing?
Oh, yeah, exactly right. So, and that's a big thing that I'm a proponent of and talk about too, is like what health coaching is part of, kind of like what you're here, like holding space for darkness. That's
Yeah.
a lot of what it is.
Yeah.
It's holding that space to actually truly listen to somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and figure out what's best for them, not for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big part of, like, I've been a paramedic for over 20 something years, and Western medicine, we're really good at that. Like, of thinking what do we need to fix the problem versus like, what does the patient need? What do they
Yeah.
need? And that was a big part of it. Was I was dismissed, and it's a twofold thing. Doctors are, they're tasked with, they have to see a number of patients just to make money. They have to,
Mm-hmm.
so it's a time thing too. And we're short on doctors, so they're overworked. They have to see so many to get paid, and so they can't sit there for 45 minutes or an hour and talk with their patient. But as a health coach, we can do that too, and to find out what is best for people. So it's hard to really get, if you're only with somebody for 10 minutes, much do you really get to know them and what they need in their life or what they're missing? You really
Yeah.
can't, in my opinion. And so, and that was a big part of it. And you mentioned how the doctors were kind of dismissive, and that was, yeah, across the board, of how the stress could impact that, and instantly want to just order lab tests and see this thing. And that's another thing too. So all the lab tests, a lot of people get hung up on, oh, I want to get tested because think I'm allergic to this, or I'm deficient in this and deficient in that. I did all the lab tests. I couldn't walk at all, and my bones were, aching. My skin was on fire, and guess what? All my markers were fine. All my inflammatory markers were totally normal. It's not,
Yeah.
just as a paramedic, we say treat the patient, not the monitor, right? So we put somebody on a heart rate monitor and we'll see a nice rhythm. It's like, oh, that looks messed up. We should do something. Then the patient, they're like, I'm fine. Like, then what we don't need to do anything, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So you treat the person and not the condition,
Yeah.
versus like a lab value that's off. Okay, we'll treat the lab value. Well, if nothing's wrong, then you're going to make something worse, because
Yeah.
when it's going to throw off that equilibrium. Just so we treat one thing, but guess what? We're going to have three other things that we're going to have to deal with. So what is
Exactly.
that balance? And
Yeah.
literally up until my current doctor, she's amazing, and she's actually a DO as well, so kind of more natural path to start a lot of it. But she's also a medical doctor. And it was funny. I was telling her, and I'm like, I told her my whole story. She knows everything, obviously, and I'm like, I'm all and stress probably caused all this, right? Like, she's like, oh yeah, 100%. And I'm like, you're the first doctor in over 10 years that admitted that to
Yeah.
me. She's like, what? And I'm like, yes. I said that's what I was trying to tell everyone. She's like, oh yeah, 100% that can be related. I'm like, thank you.
Oh
But I
my
wish I would have found you a
goodness.
decade ago.
Yeah, I know that
And so that was the
validation
kind
would
of
be
things.
incredible.
Yeah, exactly. So that I'm crazy. But and that's the other thing. It's like I knew, and that's another thing too, is so everybody has an opinion on how to help somebody, right? But it has to be up to them
Yeah.
to be able to ask for that help or get that help, and have
100%.
to be in that right place. And so that was something that I felt like to my core that I wasn't getting the right answers. And so I'm thankful that I didn't just settle for one person's opinion, one doctor's opinion, or someone else's, because I'm like, even though I felt nuts on a lot of the levels, I'm glad it ended up where it was, because it ended up on this journey that I'm on, feeling better, being able to help others, and not just giving in to who knows where I would be. And because that's the thing, as I coach people who had very similar stories, it's amazing to see the people that I've been able to coach, that a traumatic incident and or trauma or stress is related to their physical health problem. And
Massively.
the fact of a lot of people default to taking medications, which is okay. A lot of times it'll get you to where you're going, but I've coached numerous people who have been on the whole gamut of everything that you see pop up on American News Network with drugs. I mean,
Yeah.
there's only two countries in the world that can advertise prescription drugs. America is one of them. The other one's down by where are you? New Zealand. So there's only two.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of ironic. So I've coached people that have been on all those different types of drugs, and guess what? They didn't work, or they led to other problems, versus
Yeah.
trying to figure out what underlying things. One of the awesomest examples I tell clients about is picture two goldfish in their bowls. And so the two little goldfish in the bowl. One has a really, really dirty fish bowl. The other one's nice and clean. If you wanted to treat in this dirty fish bowl, this poor little fish is really sick. Do you want to give him medications and antibiotics? Or do you want to clean his fish tank and give him some fresh water and give him a new environment?
Yeah.
That's what makes sense to me. And that's how I kind of look at health when it comes to that, is try to fix those things that we know are wrong. And then kind of go from there too, because those are the fundamental things versus just chasing the next shiny thing, whether it's a supplement, medication, diet, etc. Is fix those five fundamental underlying things. And in first responder world, those can be very challenging. I always I have a Zoom today with this healthcare organization that I do that treats first responders. And the topic today is going to be sleep. And I always laugh at that one. I'm like, sleep. And then I'm like, hey, like I get it. Like sleep, that's a precious thing, and we don't get a lot of it. And so it's not about perfection, but it's about trying to be cognizant of those things and control what we can control to maximize that too. And then the whole, people always, work-life balance. It's like, there's no balance. I barely got off work today because we just sent 15 guys to another county on a fire, and we're short staffed. So there's not a balance, but it's not about achieving perfection. It's about achieving what we can control when we can, and just those baby steps moving forward.
Yeah, massively. And really just kind of looking at it from such like a holistic viewpoint of like, it's rarely just kind of that one thing. If you attack it from multiple different angles and perspectives, then you're going to have an overall better idea about what is impacting this person and be able to treat them so much better. And I think it was like interesting, like what you were talking about and that validation you finally found from, your current doctor, because I think even as first responders, we know that we experience a lot more stress than like the average person, and that that stress can lower our immune system. It's always when you're like work, and then you go on leave, and then you get like horrendously sick when you're actually meant to be enjoying your time off. And, we know that stress can we can feel it in our body. It can cause digestive upset and all that kind of thing. And I guess I never really thought much about how it could potentially show up in like an autoimmune way, in the way that it did with you. But like, I guess it sounds like, and your doctor sounded like she confirmed it, like it was basically like your body's version of a psychosomatic response of like, I've experienced this trauma. It has not been processed sufficiently in my body. This is how it's going to show up for you.
Exactly. And I can't quote it perfectly, but there's now more than one study of PTSD linked to lupus. And it's so there, and that was lately, I think in 2022, the study that I found. So like all the stuff that I was saying about 10 years ago, like I'm like, hey, like this has got to be related, like PTSD, stress, autoimmune, and nothing. And now studies are finally starting to come in. And then there's a disruption in the gut, and all that obviously affects our immune health. But it can show up in lots of different ways. And it's a real common thing. So like the three components for like an autoimmune disease are typically genetics. There's usually a genetic component, and that's exactly too with my family, autoimmune. But just because you have a gene doesn't mean it's going to happen, just like cancer or anything else. That gene needs to get turned on somehow. And so there's usually a genetic component, environmental factors, and then a triggering event. And that's exactly what was going on with me. And that's a real common thing. And especially when I've been coaching people, it's incredible to see people like, oh, like, yeah, I or had some symptoms and then this happened in my life. And obviously it's been going on there, and it's been so crazy to see the stress component of it. And how that's a trickle down to, and then especially in the age. So typically, especially with autoimmune, 30s and 40s, that's a super common time. So things start breaking down. I'm starting to see a lot of bad stuff in our life, and then just exposure. So that's a real common component.
Yeah, and I do think there is so much that we don't know about like autoimmune conditions and diseases, and because my like similarly, like you were saying, there's like a genetic component. My eldest son has alopecia and started like losing patches at like 18 months old, and then all of his hair fell out when he was
Oh,
three and a half, and it's never like fully sort of come back. And like, you know, I remember just before he was starting like school, like
so hard.
yeah, like you know, we're talking like eyebrows, eyelashes, like everything. And I think it is in that thing. You're like, there's when you can point to a cause for something, you know what I mean? When you're like, yes, I experienced trauma, and then like this has impacted my body, and now I have like an understanding and a realization, and there's like a causation, so you can kind of hold on to that. I think with a lot of you know autoimmune conditions, like there doesn't really seem to always be that like that specific causation. Like you're saying, genetics play a role, but then you kind of go like,
Correct.
yeah, like when there isn't just like that one thing where you can point to, I think that can cause like a lot of distress for a lot of people as well. And because they're not discussed a lot in society as much as, you know, like you're saying about cancers or any other things like too.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And yeah, especially amongst young children too, right? Because they haven't had this stuff. So, and I wish there was a cause or a cure for autoimmune, and there's not. And like even for myself, so I'm sitting here, I can function normally, but it's not because, oh, I'm good now. It's a constant effort every day. Like I know things that affect me, and is it ever going to go away? No, I tell people I'm 95% symptom free, which to me, that's good enough for me. Like it's never going to go away. And it's just something I've come to live with, but I'm able to lead a normal life again, which is incredible for me, to be able to go from where I was to where I am now. And I wish there was a cure. Hopefully one day there will be, but and it's weird. And our immune system is extremely complicated. There's so many intertwining factors. That's what autoimmune is, right? It's your immune system attacking itself. And that's why it's called autoimmune. They don't know where it's coming from. And things get wired and your body starts attacking itself. So, and whether that comes out as like psoriatic arthritis, psoriasis attacking your skin, and MS attacking your nerves, etc., and all those things. So it just depends where it comes from. Type 2 diabetes, so similar things. So they're all under that same kind of thread. So we talked about how stress can cause physical health, but what about the physical health leading to the decline in the mental health? And then it's a compounding thing, right?
Exactly.
So it's just one thing leading to the other. And that's part of that equation, right? Too. You're not feeling good, so then you're depressed, and then it just goes.
It's that vicious sort of cycle that just keeps, impacting back on each other. And do you find that like, and I don't know where you are with your sort of PTSD journey in terms of, you know, like you're obviously still working, so you're obviously in a place where you can, like you were saying, can still function, all that kind of thing. But I guess, like, have you found that if your like PTS kind of gets triggered or is like a little more symptomatic, does that then kind of bring on like the autoimmune flare-ups for you?
That's a great question. Regards to like post-traumatic stress, though, there's still things that get me when it comes to the accident. I can't stand, I don't know if I've ever been able to stand it, but I definitely can't stand like revving engines anymore. Like that does get me. Nothing I can't work through, but it makes my heart rate race. It makes me feel like sick to my stomach. I hate it. So there's things like that. And then obviously hearing those calls, a vehicle into a building, those kinds of like, oh geez, like here we go kind of things. And I know, but through my journey, I've been able to manage at least those things. When it comes to just general stress on my body and my autoimmune, it absolutely does affect. So, and part of having an autoimmune is learning what your triggers are and managing those triggers. And everyone's is different, especially nutrition triggers. So some people say, oh, quit this, quit that. It's like, it could be. A lot of them are a good start, but it's really dependent on the person. Just like our immune system is complicated. And so for me, stress is a huge trigger, and that can come from anywhere: work, life, home. I have 3 kids. So I have 2 daughters that are young, that are 6 and 4. And then my son is now a teenager. So I'm dealing with all that, but he's a good kid. So wife, schedule. So does stress overwhelm? And yes, like it's really, I use my autoimmune almost as a barometer of where I'm at with my stress. So literally my skin, like it'll start to hurt within hours after something stressful. Like that's how in tune I am with my body, and go, okay, there's something going on. Okay, so what do we need to do? How do I manage that? For me, it could be exercise. It could be a day off. It could be just being with my family. Maybe my nutrition's not off or is right for me. Sleep's also a huge factor. So we always think stress is like physical or mental health stress, but lack of sleep is stress. It's physical stress on the body. Lack improper nutrition is stress. It's physical stress on the body. So like it's all encompassing. It's just different degrees of it and where it's coming from. And so stress, sleep, and diet are kind of my big top things to prioritize when it comes to my autoimmune triggers. And so those are kind of my big things. Like, and it's ironic. So I am giving a quick little lecture today on sleep. And guess what? I've been in crappy sleep for about a week now. And so like, it's ironic.
You're like, I'm the poster child right now.
And that's the thing. It's like, yeah, exactly. And I don't ever think that, oh, I'm the expert. I'm like, no, I am a firefighter paramedic who's working, and I've been through some stuff, and this is what it affects me. And I hope it helps you. That's like where I'm at with a lot of this stuff. And I do my best to manage it and offer tips because I've tried tons of stuff. And it's helpful, and it's helped other people too. And so I'm living all this stuff that I say too, and I'm not perfect. I'm not going to be a perfect diet. I'm not going to perfect sleep. Like, no, that's definitely not where I'm at with any of this stuff. I just have something that tells me where I'm at with my health all the time. Yeah. So whether that's lack of sleep or diet, etc.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And sort of, I know that you had said that you didn't tell anyone at work, like in terms of going to see a therapist and all that kind of thing. But I guess I'm sort of wondering whether there was any like education with either of your fire departments in regards to the mental health stresses that you can be exposed to. And obviously your incident was outside of work time, but like you're saying, you're going to then be hearing the calls for the similar jobs, and that's going to impact you and the overall trauma exposure that, you will face, just doing the profession that you do. Like, I guess, what was your experience with any of that kind of mental health stuff prior to your own, sort of eventual diagnosis? And did anyone, like you mentioned, being like, super angry a lot of the time, which even just like the vibe I'm getting over a computer from you, like you seem like a pretty chilled out dude. So for you to have like, been acting in a very abnormal way compared to like your baseline, like were people at work going like, hey mate, what's going on?
I don't think I don't think the anger came out at work too much that people saw. They saw my physical health, and that's the funny thing. I still remember I was in the hallway at an overtime station one day, and I felt really actually good that day. And the engineer's like, hey man, you got a hitch in your giddy up, like the way I was walking. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, really? You can notice that? And he's like, oh yeah. I'm like, man, this is a good day. You should have seen it yesterday. So like people noticed physical health, but I thought I was holding on to really well. And so, but my family definitely noticed, like, they took the brunt, I think, of the anger and stuff. And it wasn't like I was pounding walls all the time, but they like could see it. Like, your family knows you if something's off, and they knew I was not myself, and definitely short tempered, way more than not, because that's not my gig at all. I'm usually overly too patient sometimes, and it wasn't like me. In regards to the mental health aspect in fire service and my agency, nothing. We never talked. We didn't have peer support. We didn't have anything at the time. And so the most training that our department has had was a 3-hour class at the beginning of this year that I put on. And so that's that's the only department-wide training that we've been able to do. And it was funny because obviously I shared my story, and vast majority of people said, I never knew that. Even guys who went on the call, who saw me on that call, they had no idea what that call. And it was interesting too, because he's a captain now, but he was an engineer on that call with me, treating me. And he said the fact, he's all, it's interesting. He's all, first of all, like, I had no idea you had to deal with all that after that accident. He's all, but I think of those calls that we go on, that we show up, and from just our aspect, like, oh man, they're so lucky to be alive. Like, that's they're really fortunate in that accident that they're okay, knowing what the years after that might have triggered for them or anything like that. Like, it was a really good insight into the fact of, like, what he heard from me and how that one single accident changed the trajectory of my entire life. Even though from the outside looking in that 20 minutes that we dealt with it, like, oh man, they're so lucky. That's great. Like, it's so cool that they're okay. Not knowing the years and the pain and the suffering that went up just from that single split-second decision that somebody made.
Yeah, massively. And it is one of those things that is quite common amongst, like, the civilian population that do end up causing, like, PTSD diagnosis, like car accidents, sexual assault, all that kind of thing, like a natural disaster. They are typically the things that, will lead, like, a civilian into a diagnosis. And then, whereas, people in the first responder realm, that chronic cumulative exposure will often lead to, like, like a complex PTSD diagnosis and stuff like that. And I guess it's, rather unique in your situation, that given what you do, and then you ended up with this sort, kind of quasi, like, civilian experience of something just so awful happening to you and your son in that respect. But I mean, God, like, there's a photo that, like, I think it's on your website, and you shared it on social media, and it's like, having seen that photo, and with your permission, I'll share it when we release this episode. But having seen that photo, and then listening to your description of everything that happened that day, like I welled up just, like, listening to you talk about it, and the way that you were gripping your son on that, like, paramedic hospital gurney, like, whatever you call it. Like, I felt that to my core, because, like, all of us who are parents, like, the worst nightmare that we could ever even imagine is something happening, like, to our son like that, and you just gripping him like that, like, it it's very very poignant, I feel, because I think we can all relate in that sense of just the amount of fear that you went through.
Yeah. It was the weirdest thing, like, when you're talking about the parent part of that. And I tell this when I tell my story, is that I'm a firefighter and paramedic, but there was zero paramedic or firefighter in me in that moment. One, it was pure panicked, uncontrollable parent, that I thought my son was dead. That's what I felt, was that's it. Well, like, that's it. He's dead. And that's what I felt in that moment. Not like, oh, I'm going to go help him. I'm going to go save his life. Nah, I don't think I even could have done anything in that. I felt like I couldn't even do anything in that moment. if that was if I had to do something. I don't know. I felt paralyzed, and all I could do was hold him, and thank God he was crying. But it's just that weird, and that's part of the trauma is the helpless feeling, and that's the worst feeling ever as a first responder too, because that's in our core. Like to not know what to do or not being able to is goes against everything that we are, and especially as a parent, right? That's everything in our power is to help our kids, and I couldn't do either. I felt like trapped in your own body, and that's it's a really horrible feeling, and that's kind of what trauma can be.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess like, you know, you've gone on such a like extensive journey to find like where you are now. Is there, and obviously like you said, the EMDR is something that really helped you, and you're not the first guest I've had on that has just sung the praises of how much that treatment has helped them, and even speaking to one of my husband's friends who is a military veteran and was just, you know, severely traumatized, and he found, you know, success with that. You know, are you a person who has either sort of read about and I know your journey was a lot longer than most people's, but, you know, is there something about like post-traumatic growth that you have either looked into or felt like you've experienced or anything like that, kind of now that even though you still experience some of the side effects, that you are seemingly in so much of like a better place after your experience and your trauma and the, you know, autoimmune conditions?
Yeah. And you mentioned post-traumatic growth. So I didn't even know that was a thing until probably a year ago. I heard that. I'm like, is that like a thing? And then I look, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was another. Why didn't anybody tell me about this part of it? Like,
I know, right?
That's totally how I feel. Like coming out the other side of something that's bad, but trying to turn into something positive and growing from that and helping others. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like nobody shared that part with me. Like, I wish people would have talk about it more, because I'm like, that's kind of interesting to see, and seeing other people who have done that. Like it's incredible. And seeing more first responders talking about that too, and just like yes, like it's not just this disease or disorder or syndrome or anything that you're just plagued with. Like it's something that can happen, and it's something that can be dealt with, and it's something that you can move on from. It doesn't need to hinder the rest of your life. It's something that's going to be there. Yeah. It's never going to go away, and that's okay. But you can make what you want out of it. And maybe something can benefit somebody else too.
And it definitely sort of like from like an outsider's perspective, like it really sort of seems like that you have taken like all of the wealth of experience and both like, you know, positive and negative, and really turn it into something that clearly brings you a lot of joy in like using all of like the shit that you went through, and now being in that place of like being on a journey with a client, with someone else that you're helping. And, you know, I know even like from my perspective, like when you see people and you help them along that, you know, whether it's a physical self-improvement or a psychological one or emotional one or something like that, like seeing people come through that other side when you know, you've been able to help them with it, like it is just, I think it just kind of infuses pure joy, and it really sort of comes across when you talk about it, how dedicated and how passionate you are to using everything that you've learned over your journey and being able to help others, you know, struggling in a similar way.
Yeah, when I've talked about this too, is that it's inherent as us first responders that we got into it at some point. It might have changed along the way, but it's still underlying that we got in this business to help people. Because why? Because it feels good. It's selfishly a little bit, right? But we want to help others, and we like doing that. And throughout the course of your career, I always tell when I give a class in the academy is like, your career looks way different today, day one of the academy, in about 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Your view of what this business is, what it will look like, the calls you will see, how it affects your family looks way different throughout the course of your career. And that's where I'm at too in my career. I still love the day-to-day job. I'm still a firefighter paramedic. I have no desire to promote. I like what I do. And that's just what I do for myself. At the same time, I'm not immune to being burnt out. My last station I was out, I knew it was time to leave. When the tones would go off in the middle of the night, I'd say, fuck, every time the tones went off. I'm like, okay, that's probably not a healthy thing to do. When somebody's calling me 911 and they need my help and I just say, fuck, like, I don't know if that's a good thing. And so even though I like the job, like something's not right. And so I didn't think that was right. So that's why I went to a different station that doesn't do it as much. So I was able to change that in my life, which is nice. And our department's big enough that we can change things around, change our scenery, totally different department 10 minutes away. So it's pretty cool. And so I did that for my own, for myself, right? And then for the public, they don't deserve that. And so your career looks a lot different. And then so the underlying helper in me has always been there. And then being able to do this aspect of it is even more rewarding because it's more than just going to a 911 call, giving Narcan, D5W, waking somebody up. That feels good, right? And then we take them to the hospital. Oh, good. We saved them for the day. But guess what? They're going to go back and do the same thing over and over again, potentially. Right. And so it's kind of like this cycle, and that's part of burnout. Right. And what this does was be able to take people's health, that it's not just a Band-Aid fix or just a quick fix, just a quick visit to the ER, just quick visit for this, quick medication that's going to, make you feel better. And then you're off down. This is like lifelong
really,
changes.
Really getting to the root cause of everything.
Totally. And be able to pass that pay that forward is huge in my first responders, and then obviously private clients that are not in first responder community too. Like it's just all about health and helping somebody in that journey. One of my clients, I love her story, and she approached me because she lives in Canada, and it was about 9 months before she could see a doctor because of the healthcare system. And so she heard about me, and we started talking and worked with her. So long story short, in six months, so she had, when we talk about lab values too, so she had inflammatory markers that were positive. And then she had no other history, but she was starting to have these signs of psoriatic arthritis. And so she had positive inflammatory markers when we started working. 6 months later, she had negative inflammatory markers. She lost 50 pounds on top of that. And that was not her goal at all. She like if it was a secondary thing to her health, right? And that's should always be the case. It shouldn't be about weight loss; it's about health. And so she was able to do that. But not only did she do that in a sustainable way, that she didn't have to go on medication, see doctors, specialists, etc., but she carried that to her family. So her daughter had IBS issues, and what she learned to be able to implement with her family, and her daughter was able to minimize all her IBS issues.
Wow.
She did that for her husband. Her husband ended up losing 60 to 70 pounds of that, just from the stuff that she learned and be able to carry it forward. And that's what I liked. And when I tell people, it's like, it's not a quick fix. Life in general, it shouldn't be anything quick, is usually not a good thing. And so that's why it's like implementing those changes that are fundamental and something that you can carry forward and push on, not just to the next thing. And so that's what a big thing that I like to do, is those long lasting changes that you can share with other people and help them too. Cause that's what we should all be about, is trying to help other people too, and helping your own family. And that's a big part of this too, is especially us as first responders, we're a bunch of hypocrites. We really are. There's a lot of us are, that's kind of what it is. And there's there's a quote too. I don't know who said it, but anyways, it's like people say, "Oh, I'll die for my family." Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll take a bullet. We'll die for our family. But will you live for your family?
Yeah.
Will you go to a therapist? Will you take care of your health? Will you do those things that you know you need to do to be there for your family? That's the true question. And that's where the underlying trajectory of your life should be, is truly living for your family. If you're stuck in some place that you don't want to be, stuck doing things you don't want to do, will you go get the help and do those things you need to do to live for your family? We don't want you to die for your family. We want you to live for it.
Yeah, no, and I've heard that quote, and it is, I think it's incredibly powerful, because like you're saying, like these people are saying, oh, I'd walk on hot coals and take a bullet and lay down my life for my partner or my child or whatever else. But it's kind of like, I always look at it like people, there's like the cultural stigma amongst first responders that talking about, our mental health or depression or struggling in any way, suicidal ideation, from the bygone era, that it's considered, weak and you just should suck it up and all that kind of thing. And I just look at it in like the complete opposite way, and that it takes, like, anyone can wear a mask and anyone can shove their feelings down and drink a little too much and smoke a little too much and, carry on anyway. But to actually face up to whatever maybe trauma that you've experienced, to actually sit in your pain, in your uncomfortableness, face up to the fact that maybe you're a shit partner and you have never learned the tools, and it's time you go and start to learn the tools. Like, there is more courage and more, bravery and I'm trying to think of another word, but there's more commitment in terms of that. And I think, like the narrative just needs to be switched, because it's slowly coming there. But I think it's so much harder to actually face up to your stuff than to hide from.
Yeah. And I agree. There's the culture depends on where you're at. I guess out here on the West Coast and stuff, it is changing. But it's pretty ironic, and it's funny. I had a post on Instagram that got some great comments. And you should have seen my inbox on some of it. So it was a good reminder to me that, there's still a good stigma out there. And the messages that I'm like, oh, well, the good news is like, that's the people I wanted to hear it. So it's not my problem, it's your problem. And so it's funny, but I'm like, oh, the stigma's still very alive and well, because the stuff that people choose to send over social media sometimes too. And that's few and far, but it's funny how we do that too. Sometimes we'll stick with like the negative comments, even though 99% of stuff's very positive and stuff, but you get those negative comments, you're like, oh geez. So, but it's still alive and well in some ways, that we are slowly changing. And you brought up a good point too, I think, about stuffing stuff down, having the next drink or whatever, etc. And it's called compartmentalization, right? And the thing is we need to compartmentalize to do our job on scene of a call, right? So we are working like a cardiac arrest. The family members are frantic. We can't just start being screaming and frantic with them, right? We have to shove it all down, do the job, and be effective and professional at it. And we're in control when we're like that. And so we do that on our days off too, right? It's like, oh, that kind of but we're going to shove it down because that's what we're trained to do. So we do that over and over and over again. And that's when things kind of arise. So we're trained compartmentalizers. That's what we train to do, but we need to untrain that in the regards to offload that baggage that we do carry at times too, because that will creep up and affect us in lots of different ways too. So it's kind of a twofold thing. We have to do it to maintain our job, but we have to know when to let things go too, or seek that help when we need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that I often say, like, I think as first responders, there's a, like, whether it's compartmentalization, or I sort of say it's like a healthy, like a quote unquote healthy level of disassociation, because like you're saying, like, if you're feeling things in real time, well, you're trying to do chest compressions on someone while their family's screaming in the background, or, run into a hot job with like offenders on or something like that. Like, if you're feeling it at the time, it's going to impede your, professional performance. So I always kind of think like a healthy level of just that kind of separation. But I remember talking to someone else on here, and they were just kind of like, we're encouraged and, shown the ropes of how to compartmentalize, disassociate, shove it down, no one ever talks about or teaches us how to unpack it. And I think that's where the danger is. And especially like, when it comes to trauma, and then it still sits in us. And, it was funny. Like I did a trauma certification recently, and sort of learning about a lot of different, parts about how it resides in our body and how it affects us and all that kind of thing. And I think, we've all been through stuff where we've had to heal from whatever has happened in our life. And there is just like that level of, there's a weight that you have that you don't necessarily know that you're carrying. And it's only when you heal from it, or you unpack it, or you forgive yourself, or offer compassion, or whatever it is that you need to be able to like relinquish the control and the hold that has on your body. Like there's this feeling of lightness that you kind of go, oh shit, like it was like I had this really heavy backpack that I never knew that I had. And I think just the way that it shows up for us like that is it's important to actually recognize when it happens, because then you go, oh, now I get it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And I think you touched on a really good point, and that's a lot of it from my healing journey. And what I coach people with is self-awareness is kind of the prime key about that. And it's tuning in to your body, your brain, your mind, body connection and all that too. So you can make those decisions. It's no different than we go to scene calls. We have to have situational awareness. We in our own lives, we have to have self-awareness too we've had a string of bad calls, or this isn't going so sideways in my life right now, so I should be more cognizant to work out, meditate, do whatever the things you are to do to kind of balance those things out, offset it. But I think just having that self-awareness, situational awareness is probably the number one thing that I've learned. And I've been forced to because of my physical health, but it's something that's helped me for every aspect of my life too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you have mentioned that you are on the socials, and that's where I came across you. Tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find First Wellness Health if they would like to get in touch with you, and I can pop everything in the show notes too.
Perfect. Yes. So it's Egan First Wellness on Instagram, and I have YouTube too, which I need to be more active on, but I do have some videos on there. I'm working on that. And then Facebook, and I actually do have they're newer too, Facebook groups too, for autoimmune stress connection Facebook group, as well as a first responder only mind body wellness group too, that we're kind of starting to grow. And so those are some other Facebook groups, but and then my website's firstwellnesshealth.com, and you can find access to all that stuff too. So feel free, message me or any questions on any of that stuff. I'm out there, so you can Google my name too, and some stuff will pop up. But,
all right. Fantastic. I will, like I said, I will pop all of that in the show notes. So if anyone wants to get in contact with Egan, we can organize that. Thank you for your time. I know that, you are on zero sleep, and it has been a busy week for you. So I very much appreciate it. We normally finish off.
Absolutely.
We finish off these episodes by asking our guests a couple of questions, and it's from the name of the podcast, I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. And obviously the things that, you have experienced in your life, as well as the profession that you do, you have been exposed to, a lot of darkness, as many of us are. And sort of the first question I like to ask is, what do you do to be able to hold space for your darkness?
It's a great question. So to be able to hold space, when I think of that saying, is empathy. I think is a big part of it, in understanding that not everything's good, and there's bad things in our life, bad things that affect us. But that's what makes us who we are. And we have a choice whether to make that into something that's beneficial for us and those around us, or negative. And so that's a choice that I think that I try to make and try to present every day, to be able to do that. So I've where my life is trajectory career wise, like everything's changed since that date for me. And so I'm constantly under realizing that happened. And I know that bad things happen to me, but I also know what I can do or who I can call, to be able to help carry me through that too. And so it's having those resources, having those connections, having those people like yourself who will listen. And I think a lot of it is like that empathy versus sympathy, right? Is actually being with that person in that darkness and holding that space, like you say, and just being there. It's not trying to fix it. It's not trying to offer solutions per se. It's simply just being there and wrapping your head around what it is they're feeling, and just being a good human, I think, is what a lot of it comes down to. And so that's kind of what I do, is relish in that fact of it's there. But there's the other side of it, and I can come out the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really like that. And it sort of definitely sort of sounds like that was just kind of like your complete sliding doors moment, and that, the rest of your life was just that trajectory, whether you wanted to be on it or not. it was already destined.
Yeah.
And you may have sort of kind of half answered the second question, I guess, but it was kind of like, what can someone do in order to help and support you to hold space for your darkness?
Yeah, I think that is just being there, being a human, and offering that empathy and being with that person. And truly, I think a big part of it, especially with my journey, was listening. So there's a difference between hearing and listening, and truly listening to somebody, of what they're actually saying underlying, is may not be the words that are coming out their mouth or anything else too. And I also have 2 girls, and so that's part of it too, is learning what they need versus what they're saying, and just having space for that person, and truly being there and being a good human, I think, is what it comes down to for me.
No, absolutely. I really, really like that. Yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing all that you've shared with us here today. I think it's really beneficial, and especially the more that we learn about the mind-body connection and all of the different interrelated parts that affect our health, I think, especially for, the first responder population that we both either are, a part of or have loved ones in, that, all we do is want the best for them. So moving forward, I think you're really, contributing a lot in that space. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, we will wrap it up. This has been another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. I've been your host, Erin Jane. And as always, let me listen in a way you've never been heard. Cheers.